friends, so we are here for our second lesson in our ecology unit. This is another big notes one because we'll be using the notes from yesterday and today to guide our learning for the rest of the week. So today we're going to dive deeper into those different types of ecosystems, today looking at the difference between aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. Of course, make sure that you are pausing and rewinding as you need, so that way you can have appropriate understanding and be getting down these notes. I would definitely have the notes up as you are watching this video, and you can pause me as you go, so that way you make sure that you get everything down. And on that note, you need to have your notes up. These are digital notes, but you may have chosen to print them. Either way, you need to make sure that you have those notes handy. All right, let's jump right in. We're going to be using some graphic organizers to kind of show the relationship between these. We're going to start with aquatic ecosystems. Remember, aquatic ecosystems means that they have to do with water, right? These are ecosystems that are primarily water. There's two types of aquatic ecosystems. We have our saltwater ecosystems, and then we have our freshwater ecosystems, okay? Those are the two subcategories of aquatic ecosystems. What are some of our saltwater ecosystems? So one is a salt marsh that we'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow. The other is the ocean. This is one that we're probably fairly familiar with because we've heard about it. And within all of these, but we're just going to focus specifically on one in each category, excuse me. Within the ocean ecosystem, I have living and non-living things. Some examples of living things in the ocean would be like fish, whales, corals, seaweed, those plants, those animals, that bacteria that lives in the ocean. Feel free to put your own examples of living things in the ocean. Also within that ocean ecosystem, I have non-living things, right? I have sand, I have water. Those things aren't living, but they're still a very important part of that ecosystem. Again, make sure that you're pausing to get these down, whether that be on your digital notes or in your handwritten notes. All right, now one that's kind of peculiar, we'll say, unique in a way, is the estuary, okay? So an estuary ecosystem is both saltwater and freshwater because that is where that saltwater and freshwater meet, okay? So we'll be looking more at these as we go throughout the week. But the Pamlico Sound in North Carolina is an example of an estuary. That's where the Tar River and the Pamlico River, which are freshwater ecosystems, meet with the Atlantic Ocean, which is a saltwater ecosystem. So that's special because it is both a saltwater and freshwater ecosystem. What are some more freshwater ecosystems? So like lakes and ponds. Lakes and ponds have like fish, turtles, algae, etc. It's very similar to the ocean in terms of the things that live in there. Perhaps not the size, but things that live in lakes and ponds have to live in fresh water versus things that live in oceans have to live in salt water. So that's a special adaptation of those organisms. And then with non-living, very similar, right? That water, those sand, those rocks. And then we also have like rivers and streams that would be freshwater as well. So these are our aquatic ecosystems. Again, we're going to be utilizing these notes as we move forward in this week of learning to continue diving deeper into these. Go ahead and make sure that you have these down, and then we're going to go ahead and move on to our terrestrial ecosystems. All right, so for our terrestrial ecosystems, again, we are working, terrestrial means that they are not water, right? This is part of the earth. That root word in terrestrial means earth. And so now we're looking at our quote, quote, land ecosystems, right? We have three types that we're going to be looking at a lot in 5th grade, and those are grassland, deciduous forest, and rainforest. All right, let's start with our grassland. So our grassland is very little precipitation. We can think about grasslands as like maybe in the Midwest or in the savanna in Africa. There's very little precipitation there. And it has normally a hot summer and a cold winter, kind of those two different extremes. And as you've probably guessed, what's the plant life there? Well, it's going to be grass, right? It's going to be grass and shrubs. There's not very many trees on the grassland. It's mostly this grass. Normally it grows a little bit taller. If you think about like our pictures from westward expansion when we were looking at like the prairie, that would be a grassland. And shrubs, so like bushes, stuff like that. And so the wildlife there can of course be a lot more than just on what's on there, but we can think of like bison, prairie dogs, hawks, animals that live in either that are living in the ground, not necessarily in the trees, because again, in that grassland, there's not many trees. All right, a deciduous forest would be kind of like the forest that we have around us. And there's moderate precipitation, right? And then there's very distinct seasons, okay? There's a spring, there's a summer, there's a fall, there's a winter. There's very distinct seasons. Normally they are more in the temperate sphere. Like it does get cold, it does get hot in North Carolina, but it doesn't get like below 0 and over 100 very often, right? So we have those distinct seasons, overall temperate. And the plant life is deciduous trees. What do we mean by deciduous trees? Well, those are like evergreens, oak trees, pines. We still have those shrubs, but we are starting to see more of those trees and more of those like hardwood trees that we would have around us. What lives there? Tons of stuff, right? Rabbits, birds, bears, etc. A whole bunch of stuff can live there. So then we bring to the rainforest. This would be like the Amazonian rainforest, which is probably the one that you've heard the most about. And there's lots of precipitation, hence the name rainforest, okay? And these rainforests are normally located closer to the equator. We know from our study of weather and Earth's tilt that because of Earth's tilt and because of Earth's curve, areas around the equator get a lot more sun, right? And so overall, rainforests are just like hot and wet. If you've ever been in the butterfly room at the Museum of Life and Sciences or the Museum of Natural Sciences in Durham, that would be how it is, just like humid, wet, and very, very warm. And so what lives there? Well, our tropical plants live there, right? We still have trees, absolutely, but they are different trees than what we have now because they're adapted to that lots of precipitation, hot and wet. You might see some tropical ferns, flowers, but all of these plants have adapted and need to live in a place that's very humid and wet, hence why they thrive in the rainforest. And then what do we see in the wildlife? Well, we still see birds, right? Just like we've seen throughout, but they're different kinds of birds, right? Like there are those toucans, those parrots. We might see panthers. We might see just some more. We might see like those cool tree frogs. Again, we're seeing animals that have adapted and that that live very well in that kind of ecosystem, right? Because we want to make sure that but the animals live there because they know that they can thrive there, right? That's a review from yesterday. All right, friends, again, go ahead and make sure that you have all of this down, that you paused and rewound however you needed, and that you have also reached out to me with any questions that you may have.